Okay, let's do it. Haiti, Houthis, Iran, Israel. We'll do an update on Ukraine. Let's go through. Let's talk about what we've already talked about. Let's get an update. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Headlines and History with me, your host, John Malik. Now, listen, here's what we're going to do this week. We're going to call it our Retrospection number 1. We've been talking about a whole slew of topics since we started this podcast back in March. We're on this one's going to be 25. So we're on episode 25, and we've talked about a whole host of things, all the way back in the beginning when we talked about the German audio leak for those that caught episode 1. And I think it's only smart. I think it's a good idea that we go through and let's revisit some of these topics. They are headlines topics, right? And we do definitely talk about some history in connection with these headlines. That's the purpose of the podcast. But let's not leave everyone hanging, right? Not everyone pays attention to the news every single day. So we're going to do a retrospective. We're going to do this occasionally throughout our time. I want to make sure that issues that are ongoing, that we get some relevant updates and keep everybody abreast of what it is that's going on across the world. So we're not going to do all of the episodes. We don't have time for that. And plus, some of the episodes just don't have an update that's really all that relevant, right? So, for example, we talked about the fentanyl China crisis back in episode 11, I think, or something, right around that time. And it's a good topic. It's something that's happening today. It's a challenge for the United States. There's a connection between the United States and the CCP in regards to the fentanyl crisis. But it's been a couple of months and there really hasn't had any changes. We haven't had any significant events that have occurred in that topic. So we're gonna skip right along. But there's others that have been moving forward, and I think it's only a good idea that we touch base on those. So again, we're gonna call this our retrospection. It's our first one here on episode 25. Made some changes to the website, headlinesandhistory.com. So go ahead and visit the website if you haven't done that already. If you haven't done it in recent times, we've got a mailing list going on, as well as I've got all the episodes from every episode that we've done from the show up on there. I've got a few other pages, the bio, some requesting and interview stuff. So head out to headlinesandhistory.com. There's a donation page. If you'd like to support the show, I'd be really grateful to do that. So head on out. We're going to continue to grow this thing and continue to make this thing better and better as we go along. So check out headlinesandhistory.com for all your headlines and history podcast news, right? You can reach out to me there, contact me at johnmalik@headlinesandhistory.com through the email, or there's a contact list there, or whatever you'd like. But sign up for our mailing list. Right now, we're not doing anything regularly, but again, this thing is going to continue to grow. So check that out, get on the mailing list, and we'll see what happens in the future. All right, so let's get into this thing. Let's go back to episode, I want to say it was 2, right? It was the first time we had a discussion about the Haiti crisis, what's happening down in the Caribbean, and why it's an issue for this hemisphere, if not the globe. This is the episode we learned about our buddy Barbecue, Jimmy Cherizier, who is let's call him the most prominent gang leader in all of Haiti right now. And we talked about his history a little bit, why he came up with the history, or why he came up with the name rather, of barbecue, and why he's called that. He makes the claim that his mom was very good at making chicken for years or something, but in actuality, it's because he burned so many houses down for so long. So he's called Barbecue. Former police officer, who's now, again, leading one of the most prominent, one of the strongest, one of the most capable gangs in Haiti right now. What was the topic? We talked about the government kind of collapsing. It still exists. It's still there in some minor structure. It still has some of a foothold on parts of the capital and parts of the country itself, but some of the smaller urban areas have been taken over by the gangs, and they're looking for a political change to include our boy Barbecue. If you recall, during our episode, at that point, the actual president, the legal president of Haiti at the time, Ariel Henry, he was out of the country. He had fled to Kenya as a result of some of the violence, some of the political violence. and he was working on negotiating a return concurrent to negotiating a security presence from wherever he could get some resources so he could try and reestablish some security back in Haiti. Now, as we stand today, the crisis is ongoing. There's been very little change. And when I say little change, I mean strategically. There's been some decisions that have been made. As a matter of fact, the United States got involved, not directly, but commanders at Southcom, Southern Command, which is the part of the United States military command structure of that part of the world, decided to supply some MRAP vehicles. The first tranche was 10, I believe, 10 MRAP vehicles to the national security forces in Haiti to try to quell some of this violence. It didn't work all that well. One, because the individuals that were using these MRAPs weren't well trained, and they didn't have the turrets on top of them. If you can recall from operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, some of the MRAP vehicles had these turret-like structures. They look like a turret because it sits on the top of the vehicle, but it's really kind of it's really a gun mount for a 50 cal or sometimes a 249 saw, and it allows the soldier that's sitting on top to see pretty clearly above all of the other vehicles that are around. Easier to see on the second level floors because the MRAP sits really, really high, and it has metal around it to protect from gunfire from potentially higher levels, again, from second and third story windows, as well as rocks being thrown and rifles being shot from the ground. So it's a pretty capable turret-like structure, and the first MRAPs didn't have that. And so the government in Haiti had requested that they receive more of these vehicles with those turrets and with those capability. And I just read in the media this week that Southcom has decided to send 25 more of these things with the turret capability into Haiti, again, to try and push back some of this influence that the gangs have. Now, like I said, there hasn't been much change strategically, and I mean that on the battle space because, so much of a percentage of the country is controlled by the gangs now. But what did happen is Ariel Henry, who had left, as I said, he did succumb to pressure, international pressure, which included the United States, to resign as the leader. And he did that, and then there was a temporary government that was voted upon and installed, and now this kind of caretaker temporary government is in charge, trying to establish a full-time or permanent political system that doesn't include former leader Henry. As you might imagine, given the influence that the gangs have within Haiti right now, a good number of those individuals who are part of this caretaker government have been either threatened or killed, and it's really suppressed the amount of people that are willing to volunteer for that position for obvious reasons. I mean, it's dangerous, right? Nonetheless, the process is going forward, and hopefully they'll be able to come to a permanent resolution. So, but it's not all lost. Like I said, so the Haiti's National Police, they did just issue an arrest warrant for an individual, a gang member who has been accused of assassinating really 2 American Christian missionaries within the last few months. I believe the assassination was back in April or May. Their names were David and Natalie Lloyd. The reporting indicates that over 100 gang members had stormed their compound and killed them in a very brutal manner. But nonetheless, they're American citizens. They were down there. Again, I don't know all the details of what they were doing, but they called them missionaries, so you can imagine what it is they were doing from a religious perspective. But nonetheless, trying to help Haiti in whatever way they could, and lost their lives as a result. So, again, the National Police has issued a warrant for the individual. They claim that they had heard him on a telephone referencing the murders after they had happened, and they used that as evidence to arrest him. They haven't told anybody who it is, but just that they issued the warrant, and I think they even have him in custody at this point. But again, they didn't tell us who it is. So that's an indicator that there's still a process working, right? The official political system is still kind of operating in Haiti. It's not a complete and utter loss of structure or It's not an utter loss of structure and control. And the United States is continuing to help out not only directly with helping send these MRAPs from Southcom to those security forces still operating in Haiti, but the United States just announced that they imposed sanctions on the former president. This is not Ariel Henry, but a guy by the name of Michael Martelly, who led the country from 2011 until 2016. Why did they issue sanctions? Because as a part of his presidency, the United States is claiming he was part of the cocaine trade. And obviously, he was conducting illegal activities while he was in charge, and he was stealing money from the people by committing these illicit drug sales and profiting from them. So just hurdles that governments like Haiti, countries like Haiti with their style of government that hasn't really been. It's just another example of the challenges countries like Haiti face when you have corrupt politicians who are not working for the people but are working for themselves. I mean, the leader of the country is involved in cocaine sales. It's mind-blowing. But the process continues. The gangs are still in charge. The numbers vary. I don't know, 80%, 85% of the country, particularly in the urban areas. The caretaker government is working hard to set up a permanent process. The United States is sending help. There are Kenyan troops I neglected to mention in the beginning. So that was one request that Ariel Henry was looking for when he was in Kenya after he had been booted, was to try and return to Haiti, but then return with Kenyan forces. He wasn't able to return, but he was able to help negotiate a deal. The problem is the Kenyan forces that were brought in don't have a lot of experience in urban warfare. We talked a little bit about that in the episode about Haiti. And this ties into the Southcom piece because it was Kenyan fighters who were using those original MRAPs without turrets that had problems with with conducting the fight, and they weren't as capable and they ran away. And so now it's like, boy, we got to get some of these turrets on this thing because the fighters aren't even all that efficient. And so, it's helpful, right? I mean, any help is good help, you would want to say, but, it hasn't really changed in any drastic way, hasn't changed who controls what and why. So it's a challenge down in Haiti. It remains a challenge. We'll continue to watch it. And we'll see if they're able there to get a permanent government installed, and we'll continue to follow our boy Barbecue. He gets lots of interviews down there. International news media goes down and talks to him, and he's kind of the Robin Hood in some ways of Haiti. But we'll watch him, and we'll watch the story going forward. Okay, now we can move on. Let's move on to the Houthis. That's another episode that we did. Who are the Houthis? Here's our reminder discussion, right? These are the Zaidis who live in Yemen that are mainly from the Houthi tribe, that Shia Muslims that are conducting a civil war against Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was backed by Saudi Arabia in the capital of Yemen. Now, just to give you a review really quick of what the whole purpose of the Houthi movement is, aside from the civil war and trying to take control of the entirety of Yemen, let's go back to their motto, if you will. I want to make sure I get this right. So, in order: God is most great, death to America, death to Israel, curse the Jews, victory to Islam. Okay, so you can. I don't think it's going to take you a lot of time to figure out why they exist and what their purpose is and what they're trying to accomplish, right? So it seems pretty clear. Seems pretty clear to me. No more questions. So, and that's the motto I think that you'll even see on their flag. And their official title is Ansar Allah, which is supporter of God, right? Supporters of God. So, why did we bring them up? Other than the obvious, was because they continue to affect international shipping around the southern portion of Yemen, right, into the Red Sea, which ends up, and we talked about them because they were affecting international shipping, by conducting attacks against oil tankers and other ships that were either owned by the West or connected to the West, particularly Israel. And they have that very, very small portion, open part of the waterway on the southern part of Yemen up into the Red Sea called the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that ends up through the southern portion of the canal, the Suez Canal, right, and then into the Mediterranean. So not only is the Suez a significant concern, right, from a geographic standpoint in terms of international shipping on throughout the globe, but it's the southern end, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, not just the canal. And so the Houthis have a significant amount of control, not only on the land, but with their ability to shoot and affect into the Red Sea. And so this was why we were talking about them initially. And now, so as an update, not only have they continued to attack oil shipping, as a matter of fact, there's a story that just came out within the last week that they had shot numerous rounds at, and I want to make sure that I get the ship here right. I believe it was a Greek-owned. Yep, it's a Greek-owned merchant vessel called the Soyunion, and this was just on Wednesday, that the attacks on this ship is causing a potential environmental catastrophe. It is holding right now 15 tons of crude, and it was originally leaking, and it looks like the media had said it was potentially the original leak was plugged, but now it might not be able to hold, and we'll see. So 15 tons of crude oil could end up in the Red Sea, or at least in and around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which could cause an environmental disaster. Now the Houthis came out, and this is why there's the update to this, is that they said that they did this because they're supporting Gaza, right? Which is a whole nother scenario we're going to talk about and get an update on. But there's been a coalition of terror groups supported by Iran that have decided to support the war in Gaza, support Hamas fighting against the IDF after everything that happened on October 7th. But the response from the West is, okay, maybe you have some ideological and religious connection to what's going on in Gaza, but why shoot at a crude oil merchant ship that's now just going to be sitting open in the water? It could potentially put this crude oil into the sea because you support Gaza. I don't, you'd have to make multiple steps, multiple leaps, right, to try and draw some connection. Are you saying that because the Greek-owned vessel is somehow supporting Western countries who make profit off the oil, and the profit off the oil then ends up in the tax base somehow, and then that tax base ends up supporting or buying weapons for Israel against Gaza? So, I mean, I guess you could play the 35 steps to a conclusion or something, but there's no real direct connection to this certain shipping or this certain ship that's sitting outside the coast of Yemen. And you're going to end up putting all this oil in the sea, which isn't going to do any good for anybody, and could potentially cause an environmental disaster that's going to affect everybody, not just the Houthis themselves. So, a bit nonsensical, I guess. But so they continue their fight. Now, what we don't hear a lot about in terms of the Houthis is their original reason for existing. Now, I'm sure some things are happening down there, and that is their fight for the civil war against Salah and his team. But again, maybe if you're in the region and you're consuming local news, that there may be things going on in terms of the civil war fight, but all of the international media, everything that we get access to in the West, is all about how the Houthis continue to affect shipping, and then they're supporting the fight in Gaza. So, have they shifted their priorities to the fight in Gaza and to controlling as much as Western Yemen as possible? From the little bit that I've been able to gather, I think the case is yes. They haven't been able to make any inroads further east in order to end the civil war, and they're really getting a lot of money from Iran, right? I mean, the Houthis ended up becoming one of Iran's proxy groups. They're not as important as the others, as Hezbollah and Hamas, but other than an ideological connection with Iran, the Houthis have a financial connection, because Iran uses them as a proxy force to take action throughout the region, which can include which can include and has included shipping, at least in the past. I can't speak for the specific Greek vessel here, but it has included some targets, some oil shipping targets that have happened in the past. So it looks as if that's what the Houthis have done from a strategic standpoint. They've shifted, not to say that they've given up on the civil war, but there certainly haven't been any major movements on the battle space. We haven't read any of major updates where they're in control of the capital or any silly thing like that. So they continue to remain a thorn in the side of the West in terms of the logistics and shipping, and they have reportedly shot directly with some of the Iranian supplied weapons from Yemen up into and over Saudi Arabia and then into Israel. So if within the last, I want to say 6 weeks, there was reports that it was the first time the Houthis had ever shot directly at Israel was within the last few weeks. So they're becoming a little bolder in their actions. Not only are they conducting attacks that are indirect in a sense, but they've just completely decided to go direct and they're going to shoot right at Israel. So it's not only Iran who's taken a bolder leap forward, if you will, in terms of its attacks against Israel. The Houthis have done it as well. So no strategic change in the Houthi story. And what I mean by that is very much like the Haiti story. It's still ongoing. There hasn't been a major shift in the battle space. No one's losing. No one's winning. There have been certain tactical objectives met from the Houthi perspective against on shipping, and they've attacked Israel. But again, no major changes in the civil war, and it looks like we're going to be dealing with the Houthi proxy group for a while to come. All right, one of the bigger stories that we covered in a previous episode was the particular incident where Israel had shot directly at Damascus and they hit an Iranian consulate. And then there was a massive response from Iran. So just a review, if I recall, there were some senior IRGC folks that happened to be, and their names escape me now, but IRGC members that were operating within the consulate, the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and Israel had called it a den of spies, very, very much the same language that Iran uses when they're discussing Israel and all of their diplomatic operations internationally. But nonetheless, the IRGC was operating within an annex on this consulate, and Israel decided to take a shot. And I say take a shot, and I mean that literally. So they conducted an attack on the annex and the consulate. It ended up killing a few of these IRGC members, and we talked about it in the previous episode. We went through and had a discussion about the risk assessment on that. What's the risk reward? Because what happened was, the risk was not that they would miss or, that they wouldn't gain some benefit out of it, that they knew that, but the risk was that the Iranians would treat the attack on the consulate like a direct attack on Iran. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, if you look at international law, right, if you are in a consulate or if you are in an embassy, that's technically the home property of whichever embassy is there, right? So if you find yourself in the embassy in Canada, the United States Embassy, you're technically in the United States. That's the way the diplomatic treaties are written up. So the Iranians looked at the attack on the consulate as an attack on Iran. And we had then the response where for the first time ever, the Iranians decided to respond directly from Iran and shot directly into Israel, which was an escalation. Right? They fired 300 munitions in total between ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. And we had a long discussion in the episode about what the ultimate intent was when conducting that attack. There were a whole host of analysts out there and prognosticators talking about how Iran wanted to destroy Israel on one extreme, right? Iran was looking to destroy Israel, and Israel's ability to respond was so profound that they could conduct no damage. And, then we had the other side of the house, people saying Iran conducted the attack, but it was all just a ruse. They really didn't want to hurt anybody, right? So they sent all of the munitions into the middle of nowhere because they didn't want to trigger Israel and whatever may come. It's ultimately somewhere in the middle. But, my thesis was, given the amount of munitions that were sent and the very little damage that was done, and I gave some reasons for this, but that Iran really wasn't looking to conduct as much damage as may have been perceived given the amount of munitions that were sent, right? And that's not to say that Israel and its allies in this time was even Jordan and the United States and others, that they weren't capable, and it wasn't very successful counter a defensive mission, an air defense mission, in being able to knock almost every single one of those munitions out of the sky. I believe the number was only 7 that landed, between the Iron Dome and David Sling and all the other assets that they had. That doesn't mean that Iran wasn't trying, because they were, but ultimately they weren't really looking to cause as much damage as one may think, because all they would have to do is just shoot another 300 munitions the next day, or shoot another 300 munitions 6 hours later. And they didn't have to tell Israel that they were going to shoot when they did. And then they didn't have to tell Israel that they were done shooting when they were done. All the things that they did do. So, right, all these indicators that Iran wasn't looking to cause that much damage. But nonetheless, so that conversation was about the change in the escalatory nature of that conflict, right? So it was a step up, if you will, from Israel when they attacked Iran. And they Iran directly, if you consider that the consulate being part of Iran, and most do. And then Iran shooting directly from Iran into Israel, potentially looking to kill some people if they could. Didn't, but nonetheless tried. And now the challenge is how you can step that back. And the update to at least this part of the whole Iran, Israel, Gaza, Palestine issue is that Israel took another step forward within the last, I want to say it was within the last 4 weeks, and they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh. They also killed a guy by the name of Mohammed Deif, but Ismail Haniyeh, who is the political leader of Hamas, who was living in Qatar, spending most of his time down there, did travel internationally to deal politically and diplomatically, if you will, with other nations in support of Gaza, for whatever you could call him, a political leader, whatever legitimate legal term there is for that, but that's what everybody considered him to be, the political leader of Hamas. And he was hanging out in Tehran, and Israel, even though they didn't claim that this was the case, they have yet to admit, let's say, that they were responsible, but they killed Haniyeh in Tehran. Now, there's some reporting back and forth as to whether it was a rocket, and there's some reports out there that Israel planted a bomb inside of the room in which he was killed, and it was like it had been there for weeks or potentially even months, and what kind of an intelligence operation that is, who knows, right? We're just working off open source information here. Who knows how much of any of that is true? Although the bomb scenario does seem potentially likely, given the amount of people who have discussed it, and that's not certainly something that your Israelis are not capable of, right? They can pull that kind of thing off. Nonetheless, doesn't matter. They most believe they were responsible, and ultimately, it doesn't even matter what most people believe. It matters what Iran believes, and they believe Israel did it. So that's all that really matters at the end of the day. And so now we find ourselves, not only is that a big deal, and we'll talk about the strategic issue in a second, is that not a big deal strategically, but now what's coming to bear is what we talked about in the last episode, is that what do you do to escalate now? Iran has already conducted an attack directly from its territory on Israel in response to the killing of the IRGC members in Damascus. So you can't take a step forward and say, well, now I'm going to directly go at Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, right? They've already kind of done that. So what are you going to do? Are you going to do it again, but you're going to do it in greater number? The first time you shot 300 munitions, are you going to now shoot 600 munitions? Right? I mean, and again, remember, if you're going with my thesis, and that is Iran wants to demonstrate a show of force, and they want to be able to respond and demonstrate to its proxies and throughout the region, and even everyone globally, that it's strong and wants to defend itself against Israel, you're really going to increase the chances if you increase from 300 munitions to 700 munitions. Are you going to increase the chances that you're really going to do some significant damage and then may trigger Israel into some type of a regional conflict, more so than what it already exists. Okay. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Iran doesn't want that, right? Just like Putin doesn't want an actual war with NATO. He's been able to demonstrate that on the battle space. He doesn't want that noise. And that Kursk, in the most recent episode, Kursk demonstrates that pretty closely. Nonetheless, the Ayatollah doesn't want that noise either. Okay. Plus, they have their own presidential issue going through an election, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so, anyways, what's the response going to be? And what's interesting is there hasn't been one, right? There hasn't been one of any note, right? The response after the Damascus killings was nearly immediate. That's relative terms, but nearly immediate. And there has been no response of any note since the assassination of Hania. We still continue to wait for it. It's been weeks and weeks and weeks. Right? So analysts are sitting around thinking about what it is that Iran wants to do to respond. It has to. The Ayatollah has already come out and said he's going to respond, but he's going to respond in his own time. Well, what is he waiting for? Is he waiting because he can't escalate? Right? He already did that with the 300. He doesn't have any room to escalate without entering into a risk zone, if you will, where it might actually switch Israel into a mindset that it wants to go after Iran in full force. They don't want that. So we wait. There's a few different assessments out there. Potentially one of them is that at the same time as this was going on, Iran, as we talked about in another episode, they lost their president in a helicopter crash, which, my assessment was, and it remains that way today, was just really an unfortunate accident if you're looking at it from the Iran's point of view. Bad terrain and bad weather in an old helicopter. But nonetheless, and they had to go through their political process in order to run and then vote in a new president. They've done that. They went through all the games and the charades that I described in the past as to how that would happen, and claims of there's going to be a real vote, but it was a very, very little turnout. And I talked to you about the political process. It doesn't matter who wins the vote. The Ayatollah has the trump card at the end of the day. And if he chooses the candidates, and then whoever wins, if the Ayatollah doesn't certify the election, then it doesn't matter. They're just going to get somebody else in. So, election is really an empty term nonetheless. So they had to go through all that presidential process, and that was a bit too much to deal with. Right, so they couldn't do both concurrently. They couldn't react to Israel in any strategic way with any real, really thought behind it, because they were busy doing the president stuff. So, but as we sit here today on August 25th, this is the day I'm recording for this episode. There has not been a response. So, what has happened is there's been a pretty strong uptick, pretty big uptick in responses between the IDF and Hezbollah over the border in Lebanon. That has certainly kicked up, right? And just this morning I had read, so this is very recent, obviously. Just this morning, Israel conducted what they're calling a preemptive strike on numerous hundreds and hundreds of Hezbollah attack locations, where they would be, let's call them points of origin, potentially, where they were going to shoot ballistic missiles and cruise missiles from Lebanon into Israel. And Israel conducted a preemptive strike. They knew through their intelligence process that this was going to happen on a certain day. And so Israel chose the right time and place in their mind, and they conducted an attack and eliminated the vast majority of these locations. So Hezbollah wasn't able to conduct this barrage, if you will, on Israel. Now, why do I bring that up? Because was that the response that Iran was going to send into Israel? Did they determine that they knew Israel was potentially going to go after Hezbollah no matter what, aside from all of these assassinations, that Israel had led the world to believe that because of October 7th and the fact that the IDF is inside of Gaza, they were going to take this opportunity, since the military was mobilized, to try and create a buffer zone up in Lebanon against Hezbollah? And knowing that Iran was going to use Hezbollah to conduct their attack from the assassinations, who knows? I mean, we could just be, connecting some dots here without the right indicators and evidence, but it would fit, at least circumstantially. Nonetheless, what does seem pretty clear is that it looked as if Hezbollah was going to conduct a pretty monster attack from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. There were many, many, many locations that were set up and ready, if you will, and to get ready to attack Israel, and Israel preempted it. Now, I don't know why Hezbollah would think they'd be able to hide such an operation like that, and Israel has a pretty good collection capability that specifically, or in particular, in the region. And, you're talking about just over the border in Lebanon. I mean, there's, the big eye in the sky is watching. So who knows? We'll see if that was potentially going to be Iran's response from, the Hania assassination. Who knows? We may know in the future, obviously, if Iran steps up and then conducts some major attack at another time, then the Hezbollah one wasn't it necessarily. So we'll see. Let's, since I mentioned it, let's talk about the Iranian election really quick. Masoud Pezeshkian, who is what was called the reformist candidate, won the election. He took over for Ibrahim Raisi after he had died in the presidential helicopter crash that we talked about. And but listen, there's no real reformist candidate in Iran. Okay, I've actually had some people ask me about this, and the way that I explained it was like, if you're looking at yourself, or if you're looking at the left or the right or the liberal or conservative viewpoint of politicians within the Iranian governmental structure, and let's say you have it on a yardstick, right? And on one side is the liberal side, and on the right side the other side is the conservative side, and it's a yard long, okay? And so that would be a traditional split between liberals and conservatives, or even, further socialism on one side and representative democracy on the other side, or fascism even on the other side. It doesn't matter. The point is that it's a huge line that's a yard long. If you're going to look at the Iranian differences between the left and the right, meaning liberal and conservative with reformists potentially in the middle, you're only operating on the end inch of this yard. Okay. And within that little inch you slide right or left is the ability to give you, or is the domain in which you're operating for these subjective terms of reformist and, conservative. They're all on the conservative end. It's a meaningless, description of who these people are that end up becoming the president in Iran, at least the way it sits in under the Ayatollah. Okay, yes, is Masoud reformist in the sense that he was more liberal, quote unquote liberal, than Raisi, and then Ahmadinejad, who was the president years and years ago? Sure, and is Masoud, who it's been reported he's potentially a little more accepting of Iranian students conducting protests if they're held in a certain manner. Yeah, maybe Masoud isn't going to go out and arrest everybody like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad would have done years ago. But again, who cares? It's all empty descriptions when all of these people end up responding to the Ayatollah at the end of the day. The IRGC, who works directly for the Ayatollah, is the ultimate security posture in charge. They do everything the Ayatollah says. The president has no control over the IRGC. And so if the IRGC decides that these protests that Masoud, quote unquote, would allow to happen in a certain way, if the IRGC doesn't agree, then they're going to go away. And the president of Iran only deals with domestic policy. He has nothing to do with what happens in foreign soil, even though he travels, like the president who ended up dying on the border of Azerbaijan. just because they travel and they meet with other political leaders doesn't mean he makes any decisions, and he doesn't. So it's the Ayatollah's first call and the end call to determine if he's going to shoot at Israel or not shoot at Israel or keep the Houthis fighting or whatever. Right? All of these decisions are made by the Ayatollah. So reformist, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter. They all operate on the same end of the yardstick, and nothing's going to change in Iran. Let's just be clear about that, okay? So Masoud, he's in power now, quote unquote. He was the elected president of Iran after the helicopter crash, and guess what? Nothing's changed. Okay, we had a conversation about Niger as well. Let me look. Episode 15. It looks like there's no change. There's no change in what's happened in Niger. There's not really anything to bring up that's gonna move our conversation anywhere. Not going to move our conversation anywhere forward. We also talked about TikTok. And how that platform affects the United States and everywhere else that it operates, how it's a great cyber operation run by the CCP. There hasn't been any updates really on TikTok as of late. We all just await the end of the year-long time frame that President Biden had put into place for ByteDance, the parent company, to sell TikTok. There hasn't really been much reporting on that since we've had that episode, so we'll wait. We'll see what happens. I think we might do another episode on TikTok if we get to the point where they may have to sell, and that deadline passes, and we'll see what the CCP does. I think that could be interesting. Then we had a bunch of episodes on my Iraq story. I'm sure you don't want to hear about that anymore. We had 6 full episodes on that, and then we came up with really with Kursk. So. One thing that's interesting, I could do a quick update on Kursk. So one thing that's interesting there is, we talked about what the operational size was like. We talked about how it was a division level operation. Now and I say division level, meaning the 6 brigades that went in and then, potentially 20 clicks inside the border into Kursk. And it looks as if they're gaining more and more territory. When I say they, I mean Ukraine, gaining more and more territory. Now it's over 1,000 square kilometers, which was originally reported a couple of weeks ago. But one major change here tactically is that Ukraine has now decided to start toppling a bunch of the bridges that are on the backside of the Russian defensive lines and the east of Kursk. So what it's doing is it's cutting off, and potentially this week there was reporting it could have cut off completely an entire Russian battalion without the ability to get back across the river because Ukraine was destroying the bridges. And what that was for, and whether Ukraine was really interested in trying to block in an entire Russian battalion and what they would do with them at that time. I don't think that's the case. I don't think the point was for Ukraine to blow the bridges in order to trap a bunch of Russian conscripts, because that's really what they are, a bunch of Russian conscripts inside of their now their area of operations in Kursk. First of all, the Ukrainians operate under international law, so they're going to have to deal with the conscripts and feed them and bring them back, and it just becomes a logistical headache, if you will. So I'm not saying they won't take care of them. They absolutely would, and that's the point. So I don't think that's the purpose. Right? That was the principal reason they did it. I think it has everything to do with removing the ability of the Russians to sustain themselves in and around the areas that the bridges can feed, to include that Russian battalion that's there, and at the same time, which it does, it presents an increased defensive posture because there's a reduced capability for the Russians to counterattack, if they decide to do so, to counterattack back into Kursk by using the bridges that exist. If Ukraine blows the bridges, then how are you going to get across? Now, one of the reports, or there were multiple reports rather, of one operation being conducted, they were using flotillas, they were using these temporary bridging assets that could cross the river and allow certain pieces of equipment to get across the river, both, the Russians to escape and then potentially to bring more assets in if they wanted to counterattack. But those structures, those temporary bridging assets, they only hold a certain weight and a certain size. So the ones that are being described as being used now don't have the capacity to hold main battle tanks. So you're not going to have the Russians counterattacking with, whatever, however many few T-90s they have. But, T-72s or 80s or whatever they have left that they're using in that area. I don't know specifically which tanks they have there. But the point is, nonetheless, they can't bring their biggest stuff over. So they can only use it for, foot traffic and, APCs and other things. So, and wheeled vehicles. So I think it's all about increasing the defensive posture around Kursk and, reducing the ability for the Russians to counterattack, not so much that they want to, hem in this Russian battalion. It just so happens that they potentially will. They can't get across the river, whatever. The Ukrainians will deal with them as prisoners of war, just as they should by law. We had a discussion during that episode, too, about why this was happening, and it came out after the episode that President Zelensky made clear that the reason he was doing this was to create a buffer zone, that he was looking to push back the Russians' ability to conduct indirect fires against Ukrainian civilian locations across the border, obviously, and if you push them further back into Russia, then you decrease the ability for them to fire, right? Their max effective range is reduced, their max effective range, it can only go so far, obviously, and if you push them back further, they can't reach the border. So I think that's potentially true in part, right? I think that the operation into Kursk was multi-purpose. I think it accomplished a lot of things for Ukraine. I think that the strategic points still matter, proving to the international community that they can fight on the offense and should therefore continue to be supported. I think it was a tactical win for Ukraine. I think it gives them a negotiating standpoint that now they own pieces of Russia, even though Putin owned pieces of Ukraine. And, if there's a negotiating period that Russia would have to give back certain parts of the land because Ukraine owns parts of Russia, right? So, I think it's multi-purpose, and to include Zelensky's explanation that there's a buffer state there. Okay, it is true that Russia does conduct attacks into Ukraine by shooting at civilian locations. They do shoot at military locations too, obviously, but they do take the time to shoot at civilians, as they have done in Kyiv when they blew up the hospital, damaged the hospital a few months ago, and killed a lot of Ukrainian civilians. So, is the buffer state answer logical? Sure. I just don't think it's the ultimate and only purpose. Okay, I think that one went a little bit quicker than I thought, actually. So hopefully that was a good catch-up episode. Like I said, we're going to call this the Retrospection episode, episode 1. Going back and we covered Haiti, we covered the Houthis, we covered Kursk, we covered some of the Iran-Israel update, we covered the Iran president, we talked about some of the things we can't cover. That's just not really much of an update at this point, like the China fentanyl issue. Not really much to report there. Not really much to report on TikTok and Niger. And then obviously we're done talking about my first deployment in Iraq, right? So, okay, so thanks for joining me today. We're getting ready to embark on a couple episodes about Venezuela. We're going to do one Venezuelan history, and then we're going to do an interview with a good friend's family member, as a matter of fact, Alexandra Winkler. She's going to come on the show, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Venezuela currently. So we'll have a little kind of 2-episode part coming up in the next few weeks, and as well as we're still doing our planning for our episode with my buddy from Dark History over the pond. So. And I keep dangling it out there, but I'm telling you it's coming, and we're going to do it. So thanks for taking the time today. Listen, headlinesandhistory.com. Check it out. We keep making updates to the website. Thanks for joining me. John Malik at headlinesandhistory.com. If you'd like to shoot me a contact, John Malik at headlinesandhistory.com. If you want to shoot me an email, if you have show suggestions, if you have some comments or questions about things that we've covered, feel free, give me a contact there. And again, check out the website. There's a support channel there, or a support page there. I'd be really appreciative if you could support the show so we can keep this thing growing and keep this thing going. So thanks for joining me today here on Headlines in History, and we'll see you next week.